Hey guys, my name is Rachel and welcome to my channel. Today's video is going to be episode number 2 in my Escaped mini-series. Today's case is such an inspiring one. She was held for so long, almost a decade, and she still found the will and courage to take the perfect opportunity and escape. After being tortured and starved and all of the things that she went through that we will be getting into in this case, she still somehow had the will and the motivation to escape. And that's something that I find amazing, and it's something that I can respect. It's just such an inspiring story, like I said. In this case, it does have a lot of information that I will be going over, so it might be a little bit longer of a video. So with all that being said, let's get into today's video. Today, we're going to be talking about the kidnapping and escape of Natascha Kampusch. Natascha was born February 7th, 1988 in Vienna, Austria. She did have a little bit of a rough time growing up. She had 2 older half-sisters who were completely grown up and moved out by the time she was born. The sisters did have a different father than Natascha because when these sisters were younger, they actually got divorced. So Natascha's mother spent a great deal of her life raising these 2 daughters as a single mother. And honestly, after spending her life raising these daughters, there was kind of this feeling of relief once they moved out. And obviously she loved her daughters, but again, being a single mom is hard. I don't have any kids myself, but I know it's not easy. So like I said, there was this feeling of relief once the children moved out. And like I said, Natascha's mother had gotten remarried to a new man, and they had Natascha together, and Natascha was completely unplanned and unexpected, so it was difficult to transition from being this mother of 2 grown adult daughters to now having another brand new baby. She basically had to start over this whole process and take care of another baby. Either way though, Natascha's mother did her absolute best to raise Natascha. Natascha's parents did end up getting divorced, but she maintained a decent relationship with both parents. Now, Natascha's mother wasn't the most affectionate or loving towards her daughter, but she still cared so much about her. She was a seamstress who would make Natascha these amazing gowns and outfits, and always made sure Natascha was looking her best. This was essentially Natascha's mother's best way of showing her daughter that she really did love and care about her. Now, her father worked a lot and he drank a lot of alcohol, but he also still loved and cared for his daughter very much. He did everything in his power to work and provide for her. Natascha lived with her mother in an area just outside of Vienna, Austria. Now, this area was not necessarily the safest, so her mother was extremely strict. Natascha wasn't allowed to go outside by herself. She wasn't allowed to go out and play by herself, and her mother was constantly reminding Natascha to be safe and vigilant. She raised her daughter in a very restrictive and sometimes suffocating way. Natascha had very high expectations placed on her, yet she kind of felt like she couldn't actually do anything for herself. Natascha's mother wanted her to be independent, but never actually really gave her the opportunity to be independent. Her mother's high expectations and her restrictive parenting style made Natascha feel like she always needed to be perfect. She wasn't really allowed to make mistakes, and her mother looked down on her every time she messed up, which put a lot of pressure on Natascha as a young girl. She constantly felt like she was disappointing her mother and that she wasn't good enough. She wasn't really allowed to have emotions or make mistakes and learn from those mistakes, so Natascha always kind of felt like she had to be this little adult. She tried to take on these responsibilities and act like an adult, but she didn't really get the freedom to be an adult. So it was kind of like this internal battle where She really wanted to do her best and make her mom proud and do all these things, but at the same time, she really wasn't allowed to. Now, of course, these high expectations and internal battles kind of caused a little bit of emotional problems in Natascha. There were reports that she was suicidal at times and that she may have been a compulsive eater. Now, Natascha's dad was completely different than her mother. He was a lot less restrictive and looser about the rules and was very loving and affectionate towards her. So she enjoyed spending time with her father whenever she could. Now, a week before Natascha went missing, her and her father went on vacation to this vacation home in Hungary that her father had renovated from this dark, dingy, dirty little vacation home into, I guess, a slightly less dark and dingy vacation home. It wasn't the best and the brightest of vacation homes, but he did renovate it, so it was decent. But Natascha didn't necessarily really like going to this vacation home. Like I said, it was still kind of dark and dingy, and when she went there, there was nothing really for her to do. She went because, again, she really enjoyed spending time with her dad, but all they really did on this vacation was her dad would drink and eat and hang out with his friends while Natascha kind of just sat by herself and didn't really do anything. Like I said, she really did enjoy spending time with her dad, but these vacations were not really centered around her having fun. So the last day of their vacation, Natascha was supposed to be home at 7 p.m. that day. Natascha's mother was very strict even with her father, so she was very particular about Natascha being dropped off at home at 7 p.m. and no later. Natascha was not allowed to be out after dark even with her father. And there was school the next day, so 7 p.m. no later is when Natascha was supposed to be home. However, like I said, her dad was a lot more laid back and chill about the rules. So when they were getting ready to leave and he was getting ready to drop her off, they took their sweet time getting ready. He took a nap and was in no real rush to get Natascha home. This ended up causing Natascha to be about an hour and a half late to being dropped off. Now, when her dad did drop her off an hour and a half late, he dropped her off and she had to walk all the way through the courtyard to get home, and she walked completely by herself in the dark. And when she got home, her mom wasn't even at home. She was actually out with friends at the movies at that time, so Natascha went over and sat with a neighbor to wait for her mom to get home. Now, even though it was her dad that caused her to be late, Natascha's mother was absolutely furious that Natascha made it home late. She was angry at Natascha's father, not necessarily her, but of course, she took her anger out on Natascha. Natascha's mother was so upset that she was not only home late, but that she walked all by herself through the courtyard in the dark. Natascha's mother was so angry at the time that she told Natascha that she was no longer allowed to see her father. And of course, this made Natascha extremely upset. I mean, her father was the one that was more lenient and affectionate towards her, and her mom was the one that was more strict and rule-oriented. So Natascha really needed that balance in her life, but her mother was taking that all away. That entire night, Natascha's mom was just steaming. She was yelling at Natascha about how she broke the rules and that she needed to start following the rules. She needed to be safe and make sure that she followed the rules to make sure she was going to be as safe as possible. However, despite all these efforts to keep Natascha safe, it did not end up keeping Natascha from what would happen the very next day. March 2nd, 1998 at 7 a.m., Natascha headed out for school. Natascha usually was not allowed to walk to school all by herself, but this particular day she actually did. Natascha convinced her mother that it wasn't a big deal and that she can handle walking to school all by herself. She really just wanted that little bit of freedom and confidence to walk to school by herself. So she got up that morning and she was extremely excited to walk to school and show that she could be this independent girl who could take herself to school. She was feeling brave and independent and ready to go. Natascha and her mom had this rule that no matter what happened, no matter how upset either of them were feeling, that they were not going to leave without saying goodbye. Because you never know what could happen. You never know if you're never going to see each other ever again. Now, this is something that they always lived by no matter what, but this particular morning, Natascha was still upset about what happened the night before, that her mom was yelling at her all night when really it wasn't even her fault that she got home late. So Natascha left that day without saying goodbye to her mother. Of course, her mother watched Natascha walk out of the house feeling upset and confused on why Natascha didn't say goodbye. Natascha walked off, headed in the direction of her school. She turned the corner, and little did they know that this would be the last time in almost a decade that Natascha and her mother would see each other again. Now, most of the day, everything seemed to be completely fine. However, after school, Natascha's mother noticed that Natascha was late coming home. At first, this wasn't a huge deal, but it did alarm her a little bit because Natascha was never late coming home. However, after 30 minutes of waiting, Natascha's mom knew that something had to have been wrong. This is when she called the school and was informed that Natascha never actually even showed up that day. The authorities were called and they did a search immediately. They searched every house in the neighborhood from top to bottom. They searched the bushes and the entire surrounding area, searching for any sign of Natascha. However, no matter where they searched or how many times they searched or how hard they searched, there was absolutely no sign of her. It almost seemed as if Natascha just completely vanished off the face of the earth. After searching tirelessly and endlessly, they were losing hope that Natascha would ever turn up. However, they soon received a tip from a 12-year-old little girl. Apparently, as this little girl was also walking to school, she noticed another little girl a little ways down the road. She saw this other little girl being pushed into a white van by two men. Of course, this tip led police to being confident that Natascha was not just wandering around somewhere, that she had in fact been abducted. Police questioned over 1,500 people who owned white vans and 650 other people who could have been otherwise connected to her disappearance. One of the people that police questioned was Wolfgang Puck. He was a 35-year-old man who lived just outside of Vienna with his mother. And of course, he was the owner of a white van. However, when police checked his van, they just found a bunch of rubble in the back. He said that he was a construction worker renovating apartments, and that's why all the rubble was there. And he claimed that he was home all day when Natascha went missing. However, there was no one to actually corroborate this story, but police didn't even go ahead and check into this anyways. So they didn't think that there was any reason to question him further. They didn't even really take the time to look through the rubble to see if there was anything suspicious in it. I guess it was just so much rubble in there that they didn't want to spend the time looking in it. Despite this though, there was another tip that came in from a neighbor saying that their neighbor acted extremely suspiciously. They said that he had a white van, that he seemed to have excessive surveillance on his home, and they thought that this man had a weird obsession with younger girls. The address this neighbor gave belonged to Puck's mother. However, because Puck was not actually registered to have lived in this house, they didn't consider him a resident, so they decided not to follow up with this tip. And because they had already searched and interviewed him, they didn't do anything further. This ended up being a huge mistake. Now, I'm just gonna pause here really quick so I can go into the background of Wolfgang Puck just a little bit. Wolfgang Puck was born May 14th, 1962 in Vienna, Austria. His parents were Waltraud and Karl Puck, and he was an only child. He worked as a communications technician for a while, but he was extremely awkward and insecure about his looks. He hated his nose and even considered cosmetic surgery to make him look better. He was extremely awkward with women and found it extremely difficult and even impossible to make any sort of romantic connection with women. Instead of getting this cosmetic surgery and trying his chances with adult women, he invested his time, money, and renovation skills into building a bunker in his mother's basement so that he could one day have a young, untouched virgin to himself, which we will get back to in just a few minutes. Now let's get into the timeline of events for after Natascha was kidnapped. Natascha was walking to school and was about halfway there when she noticed a man standing next to his van just kind of staring off. He kind of seemed to be nervous and like he was looking for something or someone, and she was going to cross the street to kind of avoid him like her mother always told her. Her mother had always told her that if she saw any strangers or if any strange men tried talking to her, to just completely stay away from them. However, Natascha was trying to be brave and independent, and she was walking to school by herself for the first time, so she wanted to be brave. So despite her mother's warnings, Natascha decided to keep going along the path she was taking. As she was walking, the man started to approach her. And before she knew it, this man grabbed her, put her in the back of his trunk, and sped away. As you probably could have guessed by this point, this man was Wolfgang Puck. The whole process of being tossed into the van was a complete blur to her. She said that she couldn't remember fighting or screaming or calling out for help because it all just happened so fast. When she was in the trunk, Puck told her that she needed to stay quiet or that something horrible was going to happen to her. The van had tinted windows, so she couldn't really see out of the windows, except she could see out of the very top of the window. So she was trying to look at that little slit and kind of pay attention to her surroundings and figure out where she was going. However, at first, she couldn't really figure out where they were going, and it kind of just seemed like they were going in circles. While they were driving, Puck was frantically calling people on his phone, dialing different numbers, and was getting increasingly frustrated that people weren't answering the phone and that he couldn't get through to anyone. He just kept saying that he just wanted to hand her off to these different people. He didn't want to deal with her anymore, and he just wanted this whole situation to be done. After some time, they pulled into a forested area and he kept making these phone calls. At first, Natascha thought that she was going to be handed off to someone. She did watch the news and she saw these stories about people that were kidnapped and were handed off into sex trafficking, so she kind of just thought that that's what was going to happen to her. However, after all of these unanswered, frantic phone calls, Puck said that they weren't coming and that they were leaving. After they headed out, she kept keeping track of her surroundings and she kind of figured out where they were heading. She did know the area pretty well, and she actually passed by her grandmother's house. She passed by the bakery that her parents used to own but recently sold. And after some time, they finally arrived to Puck's mother's house. She was still pretty aware of where she was because, again, she was familiar with her surroundings and the area. After they got out of the van, Puck wrapped her in a blue blanket and carried her into his house. In the garage, there was a trap door that kind of led to the basement. Down the stairs, there was a small room that was filled with a bunch of random things. And on the other side of the wall, there was like a hole that was dug out that there was a safe placed in. When he pulled out the safe, this hole led to a big concrete door where you had to crawl through this hole. You kind of had to crawl backwards and then open the concrete door, which opened to another set of wooden doors. Behind those doors were a tiny 5 square meter room. It took quite some time to get into this tiny little dungeon. In fact, it took almost an hour just to get into it. This is where Natascha would end up spending most of her time for the next 8 years. Priklopil took Natascha's shoes and her backpack, and Natascha begged him to keep her backpack, but he said no because he thought that she might be hiding a transmitter in her backpack so that she could send off signals and call the police. He was extremely paranoid of all of these unrealistic and weird things. He was completely set on the idea that Natascha was hiding these transmitters and all this futuristic technology. So he decided to throw her shoes and her backpack into a fire to kind of get rid of the evidence. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Priklopil did have a pretty good set of renovation skills that allowed him to build this tiny prison cell. He included a sink and a toilet and a tiny bed. He even went as far as soundproofing this room. He put so much time and effort into creating this room, but there still were a lot of problems. Obviously, this room didn't have very good ventilation. I mean, it was buried under layers and layers. So he did put like this makeshift ventilator down there so that she could breathe, but it broke, and all it did was make these awful, awful noises that just made Natascha go crazy. The sink broke and created mold, and bugs got into the room and just completely infested everything. Plus, there was absolutely no way that the two could contact each other through this buried tiny cell. The only time that they had any contact was when he was physically down there. She would bang on the doors and scream as hard and as loud as she can, but the room was so soundproofed that he couldn't hear anything. He just heard little tapping. Eventually, he decided to put an intercom system in the room so that he could communicate with her without actually having to go down there. The lights were completely shut off, and it was this dark, dingy little area, like I said. So she asked him if he could turn on the lights because she was just scared of the lights being turned off and not being able to see anything. He did turn the lights on, but he kept them on all the time. This caused Natascha to be completely miserable and got no sleep because she just could not sleep. Her body just would not turn off with the lights blaring in her face 24/7. Eventually, he did put the lights on a timer, which was a little bit better so she could actually get some sleep, but it made her just feel like a prisoner. She was to wake up exactly when he thought that she should and go to sleep exactly when the lights turned off. He also did some weird things that she wouldn't expect out of a criminal. He fed her breakfast, brought her snacks, made her dinner, and he got her a new bed after she asked for a new one. He would basically spoon feed her, read her a book at night, and kiss her goodnight. Now, most of the time he seemed pretty calm and he seemed to care about her well-being, but there were times where he would just completely and randomly snap without any warning. He would scream at her and starve her and accusing her of doing these awful things. He said that there were other people that were coming to get her and that these people would hurt her. He made it out to seem so bad of what these other people would do to her that he really had her thinking that she had it pretty good where she was. She thought that she needed to behave and appreciate the things that he did for her because it could always be worse if these other people came and got her and hurt her and did terrible things to her. She always did kind of have this feeling that these people he was talking about didn't actually exist and that there was really no one coming to get her. But at the same time, she was just so terrified and had no idea what was going on, so she really had no idea what to think. Now, eventually, Priklopil was pretty confident that he had complete and utter control over Natascha, so he actually let her go upstairs into the house. But before he actually let her upstairs, he prepared by locking all of the doors, closing all of the blinds, and made her wear plastic bags on her head that were like tied on with rubber bands and were incredibly uncomfortable. He just didn't want any of her hair to fall out and land anywhere and leave DNA evidence. So eventually he convinced her to shave her head. She wasn't allowed to touch anything, and if she did, he would get absolutely furious and make her clean everything away. She wasn't allowed to cry because her tears would leave DNA. So if she did cry, he would drag her to the bathroom and cause her to cry over the bathroom tiles. Now, she was not allowed to destroy anything in his house. That was one of the rules. So when she would cry over the tiles, he told her that her tears contained this type of acid that would erode the tiles, and she was so scared that she would eventually stop crying. He also brought her around the house and showed off all the food, but he didn't actually really allow her to eat anything. He would let her take these tiny little bites, but said that she really didn't need to eat because she was in this little room and she didn't really move around much, so there was no reason that she actually needed to eat. Now, when Prickly Pill would get sick, he would just completely forget about her and leave her alone for days at a time. He didn't feed her, he would leave her to starve because he was so wrapped up in himself not feeling good that he just left Natascha all alone. Now, Natascha knew that she was shoved in this tiny little cell that was buried away. So she was absolutely terrified that if anything ever happened to Prickly Pill, that no one would actually be able to come into the house and find her. So when he would be gone for days at a time, it was just that much more terrifying for her. Now, to keep Natascha busy, Prickly Pill would give her books so that she could read and learn. Natascha also asked him to teach her math because that's something that he was good at. He would write her math tests and actually grade them for her, but he ended up just criticizing everything and making her feel like she couldn't do anything. This just made her feel stupid and let Prickly Pill have even more control over her and kind of just confirmed that he had all of the power. Natascha would also write letters to her mother. She would try to sneak in little bits of information that her mother could decode but wasn't obvious to Prickly Pill because obviously Prickly Pill was reading these letters. She was hoping that her mother would receive these letters, figure out what she was saying, and come save her and call the police and that they would find her. She always asked him to mail off these letters, but he always said no. Eventually, he did agree to send the letters that she was writing, which made her super excited, but instead of actually sending them off, he just destroyed them. As time went on, he got more confident with Natascha little by little and started letting her do more and more. He made her take care of him when he got sick. He made her help with his work. He even started to let Natascha go outside and help him with the garden. Of course, this made Natascha extremely excited because she finally got to go outside after years and years and years in this tiny little cooped up prison cell. She finally got to look at all the nature and just feel the fresh air on her face. Now, of course, as Natascha got older, she started to look completely different than the little girl that everyone was looking for. This made Prickly Pill even more confident, so he started to let Natascha come with him to the city and help with his renovations. She was out and about and she was seeing all these different people, but of course, no one recognized her. Despite being able to go out and be in the city and be around other people, she never really got the chance to escape. And even further, she was absolutely terrified of what Prickly Pill would do to her if she tried to escape and he caught her. She also believed that even if she did escape, that everyone would think that she was just a crazy person and a liar. Again, this was 7 years later and she looked nothing like the 10-year-old little girl that everyone was looking for. She actually had kind of tried to escape once before, but it was unsuccessful. One of the times that they were out, they actually went through a police checkpoint. During this check, she actually tried to signal to the officer with her eyes that she needed help. But this officer didn't really think anything of it. He didn't think anything was wrong and they left without incident. This failed attempt just kind of discouraged Natascha from making any more attempts to escape, and she started to kind of just lose all hope. On August 23rd, 2006, Prickly Pill was actually in the process of trying to sell his car, so he asked Natascha to vacuum it out. Now, he had always watched Natascha when she was going to go outside, but at this time he was on the phone, so the vacuuming noise was so loud that he actually had to step away for a few minutes so that he could hear his phone conversation. Natascha noticed that he was gone, and she looked around and noticed that the gate was unlocked. She turned around and started running as fast as she can, leaving the vacuum on so that Prickly Pill wouldn't notice that she was gone for a few minutes, and so she could buy herself some time. She ran as fast and as far as she could, and she noticed a woman in her indoor garden, and she started banging on the windows and screaming and asking for help. The woman did call the police. Now, I don't know if she called the police because they thought that she was just this crazy person that she wanted off of her lawn, or if she knew that something was actually wrong and so she called the police. But either way, she called the police and they showed up, and she told police who she was. Of course, at this point, everyone just kind of assumed that Natascha was dead. I mean, police even had her mother buy a burial plot for Natascha because they were just that confident that Natascha was gone and deceased. So, of course, police were completely baffled and shocked, and Natascha gave them the address of where Prickly Pill lived. She gave him his name, and of course, police went to the house and did a search. Now, of course, Prickly Pill noticed that Natascha had ran, so he decided to go to the nearest train tracks and throw himself in front of a train, committing suicide. We also found out that in the last few months of him holding Natascha, he was also trying to get fake documents so that he could identify as a Czech citizen so that he could go and start a new life with Natascha. Now, of course, when it came out that Natascha was alive, there was a complete media frenzy. No one could believe that Natascha was alive and managed to escape. They called her the darling of Austria, and she was brought on TV for interviews and was just in the spotlight. It also came out that police didn't follow up on the tip that they got about Prickly Pill, and that they didn't actually really thoroughly search his truck, and that they didn't even really look into his alibi at all. So people started to believe that the police knew about this and that they were actually in on it. They said that the police were paid off to keep quiet about this whole situation. The public was so outraged about these crazy accusations and conspiracies that the department actually shut down 2 years later. Now, of course, going off of these conspiracies and poor police work, that the public had so many crazy theories about sex rings and basically just completely making up things that happened to Natascha that weren't true, just so they could sensationalize this whole thing. People were using this story to create madness and stories and say all these crazy things happened to Natascha, and Natascha was just tortured. They asked her all these personal and intrusive questions, and they tried to force her to give the most detail, even though she clearly didn't want to give up any information. The media just wanted the headlines, they wanted the attention, and she wanted nothing to do with it. She wanted it to just be over. But again, there was just this complete media frenzy. Natascha said that she actually felt sorry for Prickly Pill. She even reportedly cried when she found out that he was dead. However, despite multiple psychologists saying that she had Stockholm Syndrome, she said that anyone using this term to describe her is being completely disrespectful. She said that she didn't want anyone to analyze the complexity of this situation, and she basically just wants to have her own control over this narrative. Now, Natascha actually owns the house that she was held captive in. She pays the bills, maintains the house, and even visits it every now and again. She doesn't currently live in the house, but again, she is fixing it up. She filled the cellar, and she said that maybe someday she might actually move in. A lot of people thought that this was strange, but again, she just wanted to have control over the situation. She wanted to protect it from vandals, and honestly, she knew that if she sold it to someone else, that it would just be known as a house that she was held captive in. She did not want to give anyone the opportunity to use her kidnapping and torture as something to be gawked at. She tries her best to incorporate herself into society and just be a normal woman again. She was taken in her vital years of development and has had basically no socialization, so it was hard for her to kind of just get back into her normal life. However, despite this, she seems to be doing pretty well. She actually worked with PETA trying to help spread awareness about animals that were kept in zoos and being held in captivity. She says that if the animals could free themselves like she did, that they would. She says life in captivity is deprivation and they deserve to be freed from the chains that humans keep them in. She went on to write a book called 3096 Days in Captivity. She basically wanted to educate people about what happened rather than giving the media the satisfaction allowing them to control the narrative. Well, that is all I have for this case today. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for listening to Natascha's story. Again, Natascha is such an inspiring and brave woman. She acted so smart throughout this entire situation, and she used her intelligence and finessing to escape this horrible situation and go on to live a amazing and normal life. I hope you guys liked this video and I hope you are enjoying my little mini series. If you are, please make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I put out new true crime and mystery videos every single week, and make sure you stay tuned for my next episode in my Escaped mini series. With that, I hope you guys have a great week and I hope to see you next time. Bye!